Killer Innovations Podcast for Sunday, June 26, 2005, brought to you from hot and very humid Washington, D.C. Hello, this is Phil McKinney, and welcome to this week's podcast. The opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. This last week I was in Toronto, Canada with some customer meetings. For those of you who maybe have missed the press announcements, there was a big taxi cab strike in Toronto last week. It got so bad to the point where the taxi cab drivers were actually blocking the highway exits, and it was like a 3-mile walk from the closest point that a car could get to the terminal. So needless to say, I got stuck in Toronto for one extra day. And then I was off to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I was speaking at a government lobbying organization about the role of technology in the government policy, which is kind of interesting. Got actually a chance to meet with the chairman of the Federal Communication Commission, the telecom regulator here in the U.S., and as always, you always try to at least get your position put in front of them. Thanks for all the comments that have come in this last week. One listener, David, asked an excellent question from the standpoint of asking for more detail about how do you apply the killer innovation approach. You know, give some specific examples of how companies uncovered killer innovations and things that might be useful in a variety of different businesses. So in today's show, we're going to go and do something a little bit different. We're going to replace Segment 2, which for those of you who are the regular listeners to this podcast, is normally around weak signals. And we're going to talk more about the application using a real company as an example. So take a listen to today's podcast and then give me feedback on whether or not you found this useful. So I'm going to do this as kind of a one-off experiment, specifically at the request of David, and drop me an email and let me know. So again, please continue the feedback, ask questions, make suggestions. All of your comments are extremely useful for me as I hopefully improve the quality of the podcast, increase or improve the quality of the content that you found useful. Best way to get a hold of me is by email, podcast@killerinnovations.com, or you can call the feedback line. That's area code 703-636-4460. And for those of you outside the U.S., that's +1 703-636-4460. Or you can always Skype me. My Skype username is Phil, Phil, _ McKinney, McKinney. And if you see me online, drop me a quick chat to see if I maybe have some time right then to chat, or we can set up a separate time to talk. Would love to have an opportunity to talk with each of you individually. Also, as a reminder, next week's podcast, which will be the first podcast in July, we will begin using a different set of ID3 tags. These are the tags that go into the MP3 files that your players, whether you use iTunes, Windows Media Player 10, whatever the case might be, and also all the way down to your MP3 player device, uses in order to display name, display the author of the material, etc. We're going to be changing the ID3 tags to make it easier for you to manage, search, and find the podcast on your player. Today, if you, for instance, on an iPod, I don't know, what is it, 17 or 18 characters can be displayed. Well, that's not enough given the way we title this podcast in order for you to see the date. So you really can't see the date on the main screen on an iPod. So we're going to fix that so that you can actually see the podcasts and see the dates that they appear. So that will be taking effect as of the first podcast in July, which will be next week's podcast. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into segment 1. For those of you who are the regular listeners, you know for the last 2 podcasts, we've been talking about structured innovation. So we talked 2 weeks ago really about heavily on a study that I provided you some statistics from. It's available in the show notes for 2 weeks ago on what's the kind of benefit a business can have from having a structured innovation process. Last week I talked through what is referred to as a milestone gate process for innovation, and I've made available on the website both a PDF version and a link to get the original soft copy Visio version of a one-page gate milestone process that I had to sanitize. So it's been cleaned up, and feel free to download that. It's being licensed under Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, license alike. So you can feel free to download the Visio, use it in your own internal business, and still looking for feedback or comments. A couple of people have emailed back and have shared with me how they've modified it or are in the process of modifying it for use within their own business, and that's great. Looking for additional feedback. And if anybody makes any changes or improvements, please send those back. So that's what we've covered over the last 2 weeks. An email that I got this week also asked about how do you measure structured innovation? How do you know that the process that you're using is successful? And the one thing I would caution is that there's not a one-size-fits-all process that works. Whether your organization and your culture can take advantage of a gate milestone process, or you need some other maybe more formalized process like TRIZ or others. And I'm going to be talking about those options on structured innovation in future podcasts. So the question is how do you measure? How do you measure structured innovation? How do you know if the process that you're doing is doing a good job for you, or maybe even a poor job in creating and commercializing innovation? And these are actually measurements that you can use that as a baseline before you put a structured innovation process in. So in order to know that you've got improvement, you need to establish some kind of a baseline. What is the watermark or the benchmark that you have in place today? So what are some of these? And these are not exhaustive. I've only got maybe 7 or 8 that I typically look at from a very high level perspective. There's obviously ones that you can get into in more detailed. And again, I would be interested in getting your thoughts on the kinds of measurements to use to measure the success rate for any kind of innovation process. So some of the measurements that I look for, one is just the raw number of ideas generated. Now, sometimes this measurement can be misused in that quantity gets measured over quality. But in reality, what I find, particularly in killer innovation workshops, any kind of brainstorming activities, setting idea quotas, telling the participants that they, over the next, 30 to 45 minutes, they should be able to generate X number of ideas, forces them to not get hung up on what they would view as obviously good ideas, and just focus on getting as many ideas onto the table as possible. So one of the measurements is how many ideas does this process facilitate or enable people to generate? That's one of the reasons why I focus so much on the killer questions approach, asking very specific sets of questions, because I have found that if you structure or create well-structured questions, the number of ideas increases. It's actually easier for the participants to come up with ideas than asking very simple, very what I would refer to as weak questions that then causes the user to kind of struggle to come up with 10 good ideas. How do you get the user to come up with 200 ideas? So one of the ways of measuring how well your structured innovation process works is the number of ideas. Second measurement is how many proof of concepts does that lead to? So if you have 200 ideas, how do you boil that down and say what are the proof of concepts? What are some early prototypes that you're going to actually physically put together? Now these are not finished products. You may refer to them as prototypes, proof of concepts, whatever term you want to use. But what is the number of proof of concepts that come out of those ideas? Next is what is the number of trials, meaning taking the proof of concepts, whittling those down to some kind of a number. And what is the number of trials, meaning you've actually built enough of the product to actually go out and show it to customers, get feedback, let the customers touch it, handle it, use it if at all possible to provide you feedback. And then the fourth is what's the number reaching commercial launch? Now, what typically happens is, particularly in large organizations that have a formalized R&D organization, such as a research and development or a lab organization, is lots of really great ideas, lots of proof of concepts, and then that's where the wall breaks. Very tough time going from proof of concepts to actual trials with customers, so actually getting it into customers' hands and getting feedback. And then there's even a bigger wall in taking it from customer feedback to actually reaching commercial launch of that product. And so, organizations that I've been involved with, you have great R&D people, great number of ideas, but when you start having to hand it over between organizations, so R&D focuses on ideas and proof of concepts, potentially some organization, an incubation organization, focuses on trials, getting it engaged with early customers, and then you actually need product groups or business units, sales, marketing, engineering, all those kinds of things to actually take that product and do commercial launch. And that becomes another burden or hurdle. And so one of the reasons why I'm also big on using metrics is this forces the organizations to reach cross boundaries. If you say the R&D has to deliver so many proof of concepts, you have the incubation group that has to deliver so many number of trials, and then you tell the product groups that they have to get so many of these ideas out of your internal lab organization into some kind of a commercial launch or deliver that out. Now, once you've got it out to launch, that doesn't quantify, meaning that you've been successful, meaning that you've just got it out into the marketplace. Success is market adoption. What is the acceptance from the marketplace for this new product or this new idea? So, a couple of measurements that I look for is revenue within 90 and 180 days of launch. So I take two steps. So what's the revenue track for 90 days after launch? What's the revenue track 180 days out of launch? And then what's it on a quarterly basis going forward? But the 90 and 180 days kind of will give you a good indication of trajectory with the product. And if you've done the right level of planning, and for instance, if you take the gate milestone map, the revenue doesn't begin until the very last gate. That's where the measurement. So if you've done preparation for the sales organization, if you've done preparation for marketing, if you've done all of that work up to that commercial launch, then you should have good understanding or good ability to understand what is that market acceptance for that product or capability. And then the last two measurements that I think are really critical for an organization, and this really needs to come down from senior management, is what percentage of your overall revenue comes from new products or services? What percentage of your revenue comes from new products or services? And what I mean by new products or services, some people will say, well, we had Model A, and we came out with Model B in the last 6 months, so that's a new product, and so therefore it qualifies. I would tend to say that doesn't qualify, but it varies by business to business. Maybe you don't have radical shifts, or maybe that's a valid measurement. But you need to think clearly about what is your definition of, quote, new, and then track what percentage of your revenue comes from new products. And that's typically new products, and they were introduced over the last time frame. 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, whatever the innovation rate or doubling rule is for your industry. So if you take semiconductor, that's 18 months. So what percentage of revenue comes from new products or services introduced in the last 18 months? If I'm in the hard disk industry, that doubling rate is 12 months. So what percentage of revenue comes from new products or services introduced in the last 12 months? If you're not familiar with innovation rate or what we call doubling rule, go back. There's a previous podcast. I'm not sure which one it is. It might be number 10 or 11, number 11, that talks about this innovation rate or doubling rule. So go back and listen to that podcast. But whatever that window is for your specific industry, semiconductor, hard disk manufacturer, I just got an email from some listeners in Australia where they actually make equipment for the mining industry for mining gold in Australia. Every industry has an innovation rate and has a doubling rule. Whatever that window is, what percentage of your revenue comes from new products or services introduced within that, whatever the doubling rule is. Now, revenue by itself is not all that important, albeit it's great for growth, but ultimately it comes down to how much margin does it contribute. So what is the percentage of margin from new products or services? And you would hope that new products, new technologies, new innovations that you're delivering are going to deliver you a much higher return than existing legacy products as they become commoditized and as competition comes in. And that's really the whole concept behind killer innovation. There's normal innovation, and then when we say killer innovation, we're talking about those ideas that deliver you a much higher return above normal and that are very difficult to duplicate from your competition. So to qualify, you would be looking for significant revenue growth and significant margin contribution, because that would mean you have something unique that your competitors cannot easily replicate. So again, metrics, number of ideas, number of proof of concepts, number of trials, tests, customer evaluations, the number reaching commercial launch, the revenue within 90 and 180 days of launch of a product. That's also important because you may decide to kill a product if it's not gaining sufficient traction. And then the last two, what's the percentage of revenue for new products and services within some time frame, 12, 18, 24, 36, it could be 10 years for your industry. And what's the percentage of margin from new products and services? Okay? And hopefully you found that useful. I'd be interested in hearing feedback. And if you have other metrics that you use when looking at or measuring innovation, or if you have a thought of a metric and you want to get some feedback on whether or not it would be a good measurement, go ahead and drop an email and send those in. As always, when you put together metrics or measurements, make sure that you're measuring the right thing, because metrics will cause human nature to do abnormal things in order to meet the measurement. So be careful what you measure. People work to the measurement. Okay? With that, we're going to move on to segment 2. And this is really, again, in response to the email that I received earlier in the week from David with regards to how do you apply this, or how are the whole concept of innovation applied to real businesses. How do they apply it? What was the benefit they got? And what were some of the insight that helped them uncover those kinds of new ideas, new innovations? So we're gonna do this in segment 2, and I'm gonna give you a little bit of background about a business, and then we're gonna talk specifically about, in this case, I'm gonna reference it to killer questions that allowed them to uncover and identify these innovations. Now, they may not, or in many cases, in these backgrounds and these stories I'm going to share, many of these people will not consciously be aware of asking the killer question, but I think the killer question gives you the insight on the thinking process that allowed these innovators, these entrepreneurs, to break out and create enormously successful products and enormously successful businesses. Okay, and with that, we're going to talk about a really interesting business. This is a business that occurred, or a business that was formed really back in the early 1900s. And although these two individuals, these future business partners, were both born in Baltimore, and Duncan and Alonzo is their names, they had very different upbringings. Alonzo, whose father died, I think he was like 12 or 13, he was forced to quit school. He had to take a job to support his family. And his first job was one of those really nightmare jobs. It was in a foundry where he handled molten brass. So you're talking hot, very heavy working, particularly for a 13-year-old. It was backbreaking work, and Alonzo wanted out. He didn't want to. He did not see himself doing this as a career for long term. So with the help of his girlfriend, interestingly enough, who later became his wife, Alonzo landed a less tasking job at a company called Bowden Air Brake. Now, displaying a natural talent for engineering, Alonzo was transferred to the engineering department of Bowden's parent company called National Cosmotype. Don't you just love these corporate names from the early 1900s? National Cosmotype. This is where he joined a team of workers that were producing an automatic typecasting machine. Alonzo found out that he was really a born salesman and found himself being sent across the U.S. to demonstrate and install the machines. He was even sent to England, where he negotiated a $1 million, keep in mind this is the early 1900s, a $1 million distribution deal with Lord Northcliffe. Flush with this success, Alonzo came back to the U.S. He got married. However, as in most large organizations, National Cosmotype didn't act quickly enough on the Lord Northcliffe offer, and the English businessman soon gave up, lost interest. The results so discouraged Alonzo that he quit. He accepted an $18 per week position as an engineer at Roland Telegraph. And it's at Roland Telegraph where in 1906 he would meet and becomes friends with his future partner. Now his future partner, Duncan, had a much easier childhood. He was the son of middle-class parents, he attended high school, and he was hired by Roland Telegraph really right out of graduation from high school. He began there as a test engineer, was a designer, and later moved into sales. And this earlier training at Roland would come in very handy when he and Alonzo eventually set out on their own. Both men were top employees, really a manager's dream, but there was little room for advancement, particularly, in that day and age where, people typically went to work for a company and stayed there for 25 or 30, 40 years and retired. When Roland refused to meet a $25 offer from another company, Alonzo quit. Kind of had the history of being a little bit of flighty anyways, because this was already his third company, and it was kind of unheard of in that day and age. A loyal customer of Alonzo's encouraged him to start his own company and even offered to steer as much business as possible his way. And he was encouraged by this support. Alonzo opened his own shop, and then he attempted to persuade Duncan to join. But with a wife, 3 kids to support, the normal hesitation, don't want to take the risk, everything seems to be moving fine. Duncan was hesitant to give up his secure income. But when Roland Telegraph cut his sales commission, Duncan made the jump. He basically said, that's it, I'm out of here. And he goes on to join Alonzo. So, in the fall of 1910, the partners decided to start their own company. The only problem was they didn't have any money. There was no funds to really get going. So to raise capital, Duncan sold his prized Maxwell Briscoe runabout, the 1910 version of a sports car, to Alonzo's father-in-law, and then Alonzo mortgaged his house. All this combined created an investment of about $1,200. Again, this is in 1910. And they raised about another $3,000 from other investors. Initially, the company manufactured an array of products made to order, including a milk bottle cap machine, a vest pocket adding machine, a candy dipping machine, and even machinery for the U.S. Mint. But despite the early success, Alonzo and Duncan wanted to develop their own products that would appeal to a broad market. So in 1917, the duo released their first official product, a portable air compressor called the Electroflator. Oh, don't you just love these marketing names? It sold well, but not enough to keep the company afloat. Their second product, however, would start a product revolution and create an entirely new product category not in existence. So what was this breakthrough? It was a portable half-inch electric drill with a patented pistol grip with a trigger instead of a switch. Prior to this time, there were really nothing like a handheld drill. They weren't portable. They didn't have enough power to be useful. Not to mention there were safety hazards since there was no way for the user to easily control the on and off. And in this case, think about it. There was nothing portable that existed prior to that time, and they created a very high-powered, high-reliability, portable half-inch drill. We all see them today. We all use them today. Alonzo and Duncan invented it. And basically, what was the killer question that triggered them to be able to invent this? Well, the killer question is one that we had talked about in a previous podcast, which was, which of my customers' hassles could I bypass or reduce? So these hassles were drills were non-portable, they didn't have enough power, they weren't reliable, and they were very dangerous to use. And they satisfied all of this. So the result was that fueled by Alonzo Decker's expert engineering and Duncan Black's uncanny sales ability, the Black & Decker company took off like a rocket. Yes, Alonzo and Duncan were the founders of Black & Decker. Worldwide growth was phenomenal. In fact, Russia was a huge market for them in the early 1900s as one of their first international outlays. And by the end of the decade, Black & Decker's original investment of $1,200 had mushroomed into annual sales of more than $1 million. So beyond just creating the first of the handheld drills, what was the innovations that led to their success? Well, one key innovation that led to the success of Black & Decker was in a unique marketing technique pioneered by Alonzo and Duncan. Firm believers in the power of customer-centric selling in the 1920s, the partners converted 2 buses into schoolrooms on wheels, which were manned by company salespeople, and they toured the entire U.S., offering product demonstrations to salespeople and plant operators. And to boost lagging sales during the Depression, the company bought a 6-passenger airplane and transformed it into a flying showroom that took tools for reconditioning aircraft engines directly to the end users. And so in this case, what killer questions led them to think about going on the road with these buses? And keep in mind, this is in the 20s and 30s, and retrofitting an airplane that could fly around the country to take the tools directly to the end users. Well, the killer question on this one, and we haven't covered this killer question yet, and we'll cover it in a future podcast, but just to kind of give you some insight, the killer question that I think best applies is who does not use my product because it is inaccessible at certain times or places? Keep in mind that people working on aircrafts are in these little airports scattered all over the country, and they really at that time, remember, there was no internet, catalog sales really were not a big thing then. So how did they go off and find out that there's even a product or a tool that could make their job easier? And so in this case, who does not use my product because it's inaccessible at certain times or places is a perfect killer question that led to Black & Decker retrofitting their 2 buses, retrofitting an airplane, and dotting the country and actually going out and using this customer-centric selling model. Innovation continued to drive business success at Black & Decker, well beyond the founders' initial flash of inspiration with the drill. And during the 1940s, when Black & Decker was doing a brisk business selling industrial tools to defense contractors, the company became concerned by the large number of reorders that were way beyond what a defense contractor would need with these devices. And the concern really was about the fact that the Black & Decker believed the tools possibly could be failing. And so therefore these defense contractors were having to order replacement drills. So Black & Decker, the company, looked into the situation, and what they discovered was that the workers were taking the tools home. meaning they found the tools so useful at work, they were taking it home and using these devices at home. And realizing that they had stumbled onto a virtually untapped market, Alonzo Jr., this was Alonzo's son, convinced his father and his father's partner that Black & Decker should begin marketing tools for the home. As a result, after the war, Black & Decker became the first of the large power tool manufacturers to focus on the do-it-yourself market. And again, this leads into a killer question. And when I looked through my entire deck of killer questions, this was an easy one to find. And this is actually one of the hardest ones to uncover, which is what in anticipation needs the functionality of my product. So in this case, the home improvement do-it-yourself market didn't exist. There was no such thing as the do-it-yourself market. So again, the killer question here is what unanticipated user needs the functionality of my product. So in this case, the workers who are working in the factories who are using Black & Decker tools went home and used those same tools and those same products to do the do-it-yourself. And today, Black & Decker is one of the world's largest producers of power tools, boasting sales of more than $4 billion. And so here you can see with the Black & Decker story, with Duncan and Alonzo starting off as most entrepreneurs, hesitant, take the risk, should I do it? Initial products out the gate may not be the ones, but they constantly adapt. They listen to the marketplace. They look for opportunities to find the one breakthrough killer innovation that led to their success in the product category, but then continue to apply innovation through the forms of creative and innovative ways of selling their products, and then looking at their customer base to uncover untapped markets, in this case the do-it-yourself, to where now Black & Decker is the leading provider of tools, growing to a $4 billion business, starting off in the early 1900s and for the last 90 to 100 years. A great company, a great story, and an excellent example of using innovations to continue to push your business forward. So, segment 3, killer question. The killer question for this week is, and think about this with your own product or services. Who uses your products and services in ways that you had not anticipated? Who uses your products and services in ways that you had not anticipated? Black & Decker thought of their product being used only in the industrial, defense contractors, large manufacturers, but in reality, in this case, the workers were taking the devices home and using it for their home projects, and therefore that was an unanticipated market that Black & Decker identified, capitalized on, and created a $4 billion business. And with that, we're going to wrap it up today. We're actually going a few minutes over here, so we're gonna try to drive the conclusions here pretty quickly to try to keep it down to 30-35 minutes. Please keep the feedback coming. I'd be interested in hearing from you with regards to, in this case, the Black & Decker story, and whether or not you found that was useful in helping you visualize the applications of killer questions and killer innovations to a business. So based on feedback from you, if I get feedback that was positive, we'll do more like that. If I don't hear feedback, I'm going to assume that people may or may not have found that useful, and we'll return back to the normal format. Okay? So send feedback, podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can reach me on the feedback line, 703-636-4460. You can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. This is Sunday, so I'm actually, as you can tell, I'm catching up now to getting back to putting the podcast out on the weekends. Tomorrow I'll be leaving for London for a quick 2-day trip, and then I'm off to Sacramento, California on Thursday for vacation/family time. My son, I'm going to boast here for a second, my son is competing in the U.S. National Championship in fencing, a little sword sport. So he's actually qualified for the U.S. National Championship. So I will be in Sacramento, California, spending my vacation there with him for the entire week as he competes. So if you happen to be either in London early part of this week or in Sacramento for 7 days starting on Thursday, and it's convenient for face-to-face, drop me an email, and let's see if we might be able to get together. By the way, this is a personal message. Mike in Oakland, sorry about the schedule conflict that prevented us from getting together the last time I was in San Francisco. But I do appreciate you reaching out and seeing if we couldn't work the schedule. We tried to, but it just didn't work out. So Mike, again, sorry about the schedule conflict. Don, it was great to see you in Chicago for SuperCom, and yes, your slides are coming. I will try to get those out to you this week. But it was great to actually get the chance to meet Don and have a chance to talk with him for a few minutes after one of my speeches at SuperCom. Again, thanks for listening. And don't forget to visit Podcast Alley or Podcast Pickle or the other sites that you frequent. Provide feedback on your favorite podcast. The votes and comments on these sites are the easiest way for you to say thanks for the time and effort that goes into researching and producing your favorite podcast. So whatever podcasts are in there, the ones that you like, go out there, provide some feedback, vote, and that's the easiest way to communicate back to the people who put in the time and effort to produce your favorite podcast, and just as a way for you to say thanks. And with this, I'm going to say thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.